Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Trust Your Gut by Putrid Priority. Myself, 35, and my children, male 14, female 11, and female 5, were returning to my car after a very successful cinema trip. Despicable Me 4. It's alright if you're going to go see it. We were all in high spirits. The older two were on either side of me, and the 5-year-old was holding my hand. It was a relatively late showing, so we got to the car park around 7:30. Not late at all in the UK in the height of summer, but it was a boiling hot day. That's important to remember. We were in a typical multi-story car park in the city center of a smaller city, but it was a relatively open space with big arches and decent lighting. Only 2 exits were on that side, the one we walked through and one about 50 spaces up, so quite a ways away. Anyway, as we entered, I felt eyes on me. You know, that uncomfortable I'm being watched without knowing it kind of thing? I did a quick recon and saw a guy dressed head to toe in a heavy coat, trousers and a beanie, walking directly toward me, with very strong eye contact. Clothing observation might not be relevant, as the car park did have a few homeless people hanging out in it. But because it was cooler and sheltered, and the guy was in full cold weather gear, I assumed he was homeless. Completely non-judgmental observation, by the way. The speed and direction he was walking meant that there was literally no other pathway than out of the car park and over the bridge towards the town center. We proceeded to our car, which was halfway into the car park, which was around halfway full. I noticed almost immediately that our guy had not gone out of the car park, but taken a sharp right and was walking parallel along the first rows of cars. His speed had changed to match the slower pace set by the smallest of my kids, and he had his body angled oddly away from me, but with his eyes quite clearly on us, just not direct eye contact. His head was angled toward us just enough that I could see his left eye, and my inner warning system was going mental at that point. Immediately, I told both kids to stay close, and by this time my son had also clocked the guy and was giving me a look along the lines of, "Are you seeing this?" We still had a bit of a way to go, and annoyingly I used my husband's car, which on top of being a pain in the ass for car seat access, also makes a really slow, obnoxious beeping when you unlock it. It was parked alone on the last row with cars parked on it, and further past it there was a ramp up to another level. The car isn't at all a family-style car. However, there was also a minivan near us, which I could tell the guy had assumed was mine, and where he was headed, as he was going to loop around and approach from the back, whilst I was putting my 5-year-old in her seat. If I were a predator, that's what I would have done. I kept my eyes on our man and told the older two that as soon as we got to the car to get in quickly and shut the doors. No panic, just one of my do as I say, no fucking about orders. At this point, my middle child had also clocked the man and kept looking at me for reassurance because, and I can't stress this enough for anyone thinking I'm just some super panicked frail woman, the guy looked like a predator circling his prey. The way the car park is set up with the exits, there was zero reason for anyone to be walking the direction he was. The path that he was on would literally lead him straight towards empty car parking spaces, and then a wall. As we approached our car, the guy had pulled slightly further forward than us, but still kept his visual line going. His chin was in line with his left shoulder, which in hindsight is hilarious, as that must have been bloody uncomfortable to maintain for the 2 or 3 minutes of walking we had done. As I unlocked the stupid beeping twat car, he made full eye contact with me, and made another sharp right, following the next row of cars and circling around towards us in an arc. As soon as he got around so he was on the driver's side, he started to beeline it at us. The kids got in as quickly as they could, doing a fantastic job of following what I had said. And within 5 seconds, we were all in, doors closed and locked. And if it had taken any longer, that guy would have been on us. As soon as the door lock clicked, the guy immediately made a sharp left and walked directly away from the car, in the direction he came from originally. So he'd done a big-ass loop of the car park, passing 2 exits in the process. As we started to pull away, he stopped and watched us the entire time before again turning and going back to the exit I first passed him at. Obviously, this then prompted a bit of a talk with the kids about safety, opportunism, and trusting your gut, along with how proud I was of them for listening and following what I had asked of them. I did explain that it was probably nothing more nefarious than a guy seeing a small woman outnumbered by kids as an easy target for a mugging, or a distraction robbery, and luckily it had been badly executed. My son raised the point that I powerlift and that you could probably had taken him, and I had to again remind him that knives are a thing, and even without one, a man, especially a man likely to be on drugs, would still probably fuck me up. And to remember, no one would expect a parent to engage like that with their kids present, and my Google Pixel 7 was not worth traumatizing them over. It's the shittiest thing in the world, though, to have to admit to your kids that you aren't the strong hero type they think you are. I do also have to point out that this isn't the first time I've been approached in an almost empty car park, for any one of you who was out there saying, "Oh, you're just paranoid." I have had a man try to open my passenger door handle in another almost empty big open car park in full daylight while I was reading a book in my car. If you're asking, I was waiting for someone. That guy walked across the entire car park straight at me and tried the handle. Thankfully, the car was locked, and he looked surprised. I yelled at him, and he rapidly walked off and got picked up by another guy in a car waiting behind the hedge opposite. Justifying the whole hatred for cars which beep or flash when they unlock, if you're being followed, they are a beacon for your expected destination. Not so recently, I had my train delayed and got in at 11 o'clock at night, so it was obviously dark. I had disembarked with about 4 other people, and I unlocked my car quite far back. A guy walking along the opposite side of the cars further forward literally stopped behind my vehicle, so I had to walk past it and loop back. And as soon as I had passed it, he carried on through the car park. Maybe that was innocent, but it's a hell of a coinkydink if so. Either way, that night I wasn't going to find out. Also, I have been stalked before, and once a taxi driver tried to kidnap me after a night out when I was 18. Luckily, I don't drink. So, taking all of that into account, I have good reason to be hypervigilant. At this point, I don't even know why I'm justifying it, to be honest. A Metal Detecting Experience by Banshee McGee. In college, 2008 to 2014, I was an avid metal detectorist. I knew of an old military trail and river crossing way back in a secluded portion of woods that I knew not many others were aware of. Finally, one winter morning, I decided that I was going to go and metal detect it. The trail is about a mile or two from a city park along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I parked my truck, got all my gear, which included a serrated knife for digging, and began my trek through the raw woods and brush for the trail. About halfway into the trees, I got into a clearing and found a tent and campsite about 40 yards back from the river. It was very isolated. There were cans laying all around it, some clothes, and other stuff that made it evident that someone had been using it. I didn't hang around it for long and kept on my way. As I was getting past the tent, this haggard-looking guy came out of the brush just a few feet from me. I startled him as much as he startled me, and after some innocent chit-chat back and forth, he asked what I was doing in the woods. I told him about the old trail, my metal detecting stuff, and lied that it was a pretty well-known site for hobbyists like me. The latter thing I said seemed to get him a bit anxious. He started asking me if I'd messed with his campsite at all, and I told him no, except for accidentally stepping on one of the cans. He was mostly concerned if I had looked into the tent itself, though, which, truthfully, I hadn't. The guy related that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, and he was just staying in the woods until he got back on his feet. I mean, that didn't really add up in my mind, but I didn't ask anything else about it. Finally, I told him that I was going to get on my way, and with a weird look on his face, he suggested that I not go behind his campsite because he had recently used the bathroom back there. Whether there was fresh fertilizer back there or not, there was no way I was going to be hanging around much longer regardless. I went a little further towards the trail I wanted to metal detect, but never felt quite comfortable, so I made a quick turn towards the river and headed back to my truck fairly rapidly. I never saw the guy again, until about 2 years later. His picture was in the local news for being apprehended by authorities for the murder of his wife. He had killed her and then buried her in the exact area of woods where I encountered him on that day. Apparently, even though I can't recall if it was the very day of the crime or not, he had just completed the matter when we met. What Did I See? By Uger Ruger. I had some more weird shit happen last night. I took my 2 dogs for walks. I normally walk Finn, a large, all-black German Shepherd, toward a park where I had had these experiences, and I walked Booger, a Chai Terrier mix, the other direction toward downtown. On my walk with Finn, about a block away in the direction I was headed, I saw 3 or 4 deer calmly walking toward the park. Most nights where something weird happens to me started like that. The deer seemed completely unbothered by me as I approached. They kept walking toward the park, but stopped every few steps to look back at me as if they wanted me to follow them. Then, as Finn and I reached where the deer were, I noticed about 10 or more other deer waiting as well. They all started walking together, calmly, but still looking back at me every few feet. On my way toward the park, I smelled the stench of rotting meat. I know the stench very well, as I used to be a butcher. It was strong, like someone plugged my nostrils with rotting ground meat or something. At the same time I smelled the stench, I got the chills. Finn's hair even stood up, and he got more nervous. I could feel the air around me get colder. As we continued walking, I looked down an alleyway that cut the block in half, and if you would walk down the dark alley, it would spot you out where I eventually would walk back home. I was 2 blocks away from the park, and when you reach this park, you can either turn around and walk down the same road, or you can continue into the park, or you can continue on the road which turns left. Looking down that alleyway, you are looking at the part of the road that continues left, which is the way I took every night on my way back home. What I saw, I tried to convince myself wasn't real, or maybe I just saw something else and my brain tried to convince me it was this. A large, muscular, pale, hairless creature that was moving fast. So fast I could barely see it. I saw the motion down the alley about 2 blocks away. The exit of the alley on that side has a streetlight directly above it. It wasn't standing still. This thing was moving, and it was moving fast. The only reason I'm positive what I saw wasn't deer or something normal is because of something I saw later that night that I will write about when I talk about my walk with Booger. That story solidifies that what I saw was something I wasn't supposed to see. In the meantime, I convinced myself I was making stuff up and being a pussy. As we approached the tree line of the park, the large group of deer moved to the side of the street where the neighborhood was, while I was on the other side of the tree line. I noticed something in the clearing. A lone deer, separate from the large group across the street. It was staring directly at me. I had my flashlight pointed at him, and I even hung up my call with my wife to use my phone to take video of that moment. The lone deer didn't even have micro-movements from breathing. The other deer across the street were constantly readjusting, and you might be thinking to yourself, Oh yeah, deer do that with bright lights shining at them. Deer in headlights always act like that. Finn started to pull very hard and acted anxious, nearly knocking me over, and I turned to look across the street towards the large group of deer for almost 3 seconds before quickly turning around to face the lone deer again. In those 3 seconds, that lone deer was easily 30 feet closer to me, still not moving, staring directly at me. I have this on video. I have pictures. I felt weird and I felt unsafe. I've lived in rural Iowa my whole life. I am and have always lived outdoors. This didn't feel normal. I was scared. I backed away while shining my light at the deer, and once I got a block or so away, he finally turned around and calmly walked into the tree line. The whole way home, I felt like I was being stalked, not just watched, but like something was following me. I'll share a video of that deer getting closer to me. Now, I went home and sat for a bit and tried to talk myself into believing it was all a coincidence. After nearly 20 minutes, I started to walk Booger, my smaller chai mix. The entire walk was nice and very enjoyable, actually. I had my earbuds in and I was talking to my wife about what I saw in a joking way. I said, "Man, I am such a pussy. I really scared myself for no reason." At the end of the walk, I turned to go down our alleyway as I leave from the garage on our walks. I stopped speaking, and from what I saw on the opposite end of the alley, my wife heard me stop. I want to preface this with I did not have any substances, including alcohol, for weeks up to that point. The most I ever do in that department is a few beers, or I'll use some weed to ease anxiety if life is getting hard. I have no mental conditions that would cause me to hallucinate. The most I have is a personality disorder resulting from trauma that I've been overcoming quickly this last year. I saw 2 large, muscular, pale, hairless creatures walking like apes at the end of the alley. The same thing I thought I saw with Finn. This time, they weren't going that fast, and they were much closer, and I felt it was intentional. I saw them walk across the street very slowly, staring directly at me. These were not deer. They didn't have long faces like deer. They didn't have fur or tails. They didn't walk like deer. They weren't slender like a deer. My first thought was honestly that I was looking at 2 hairless male lions in the middle of Iowa. I stood there paralyzed with fear well after they had left my sight. And 15 seconds later, I finally got the courage to walk the few feet into the garage. When I took my first step, I saw a third one, slowly meandering across the street, staring at me. Booger noticed him too and started growling. I ran to the door and watched the garage shut all the way. And that entire night, Finn guarded the bedroom door, and he never does that. He sat staring at the door all night, and Booger stared at the windows all night, and he never does that either. This happened to me on Monday, May 13th, 2024, and I don't know what to think. My Dad Getting Shot, submitted by Adrian B. My dad was a very successful music store owner in Indianapolis. At one point, he had 3 stores. Barry's Music. Dad is an extremely accomplished and respected guy in so many ways and actually went on to becoming an award-winning filmmaker years after this occurrence. But one day in high school, I was in computer class listening to music with one headphone in my ear and the other in a female friend of mine's ear next to me. All of a sudden, I saw my dad was calling to me, which I answered and said, "Dad, what's up?" I found out it was not my dad on the other end, but his employee Antoine saying, "Your dad just got shot." To which I said, "What? Is he going to be okay?" To which he said, "I don't know. He's going to, blah, 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 hospital." The girl next to me had just heard all of this and looked over at me and said, "Oh my God, Adrian, I stood up and told my teacher I had to go, to which he said, "Adrian, sit down." I can't blame the teacher because I was quite the class clown and instigator. The soft-spoken girl who was listening to music with me stood up in my defense and pointed at the teacher and yelled, "No, he's going." I panicked and called my mom. My mom and dad had been divorced for some time, but I told her what had happened, and she met up with me, and we sped as fast as we could to the hospital together. I sprinted into the hospital and found out that the hospital Antoine had given me was incorrect. But the hospital did know where he was and told me, so we rushed over there and got up to the room, and there was my dad in a hospital gown. And the first thing he said to me is, "Why aren't you at school?" The doctors told us he was very lucky and was going to be completely fine. It wasn't until later I found out just how lucky my dad was. The news did a story about my dad, and there are clips of what happened on YouTube via Fox 59 News with Debbie Knox. I won't watch it, and have never watched it. But two men went into my dad's store, put a gun to his head, and asked for the money in the register, to which my dad said, "Okay, here you go." And then they asked for money in the safe, to which my dad said, "Not going to happen." My dad then tackled one of the men, and the man's accomplice put the gun to my dad's head and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. The man then tried to get the bullet loose from the chamber and accidentally fired twice. One bullet hit my dad in the quad and hip area. The other bullet hit the guy my dad was beating up. The robbers then fled, and luckily the authorities got blood DNA on the man who was shot, and the other man's baby mama turned him in for the reward money that she had heard about on the news. Believe it or not, the doctors at the hospital left the bullet in my dad because the bullet itself was so hot going into his body, it cauterized the wound somehow. I guess this happens a lot more than I originally realized. Around a month later, my dad was in the shower and the bullet fell out. Somehow, Dad's body worked the bullet out of himself like Wolverine or something. Yeah, I can laugh about it now, but it was not funny then, and by far one of the scariest things that I know my father's ever gone through, and that I've ever heard about and been involved with. But that's the time my dad got shot. Almost Kidnapped by Tar by Anonymous. Trigger warning in this story. This was many years ago, maybe when I was 20 or 21. I was assaulted when out jogging in a park while on vacation. It was deep in the woods, and I had been listening to music alone, and I should have been more careful. There was a guy with a blue dirt bike at the entrance to the trail where I was, and he was acting really creepy and suspicious. He kept trying to start conversations with me as I was unpacking my stuff and getting ready. He kept asking things like, "Where'd you come from?" or, "Hey, you work out?" When I was changing my shoes, he asked me for my shoe size, and I immediately thought he was a creep. I just lightly chatted with him and kept my gaze down. I was wearing a hat, so it would hopefully hide my face. Nearly half an hour of jogging and sightseeing, I saw the blue bike ahead. It was parked off to the side, and I remember the feeling like a lump in my stomach suddenly formed, and I thought for sure that guy was probably ahead to try something. I'd been on the main path for the whole way since, but considering he was there, I decided to backtrack a little and take the nearest side path to avoid encountering him. 5 minutes into that side path, there was a narrow spot in the trees that led onto an old concrete square. I think it was like a water reservoir or foundation or something. I wasn't thinking, and just kept going. I stepped in this black adhesive stuff on the other side of a lip of concrete, and my shoes became completely stuck. It was like some kind of tar or glue, I have no idea. I didn't know what it was, and I just assumed it was something from the structure, like leftover construction stuff or something. I spent a couple of minutes just trying to work my shoes out, but eventually I had to take them off for better leverage. Then I saw the man. He came towards me, and I just felt panicked. I was going to get my bear spray when he said he was just there to help. I didn't want to potentially aggravate him or do something that could get me in trouble. So I just stood back and let him try to get my shoes out. I noticed that he was just pretending that he couldn't get them out. And then I remembered what he had said about my shoe size and thought something was off. So I backed away and considered spraying him. Everything happened fast. He turned around and slapped my foot with the black stuff, and I stumbled trying to get back. I missed the spray, and he was wrestling it out of my hand, and I tried to knee him in the groin. He released me and ran off, and I got my sock off and was going to run, but he just had more of the stuff. He had some metal bucket of this black stuff that he was slapping handfuls on my feet. I couldn't kick him, and it was difficult to move. I was screaming and hitting him as best I could. I'm sorry if this is too much detail for anyone out there. Serious trigger warning from here on out. He was telling me to shut up and then used it on my mouth. He pushed me to the ground and took my backpack and just continued sticking the stuff to my body. I was frozen in fear. I heard a buzzing sound, and I knew what it was without seeing it, and I began struggling to get up or kick him or do something, but my clothes were pinned and my arms were too. I'm not going to give details, but he used a vibrator on me. I was crying and stretching as far as I could. If I got an arm almost out, he would add more. And I rarely ever masturbated at the time, so suffice it to say, it was overstimulation. He didn't undress me apart from my pack and socks and didn't use his penis anywhere, so I was at least grateful for that. He just kept buzzing me and fondling my body with the stuff and asking things like, "Do you like this?" or "Does this feel good?" It was probably around an hour of that, and he was recording it. I just let him do whatever until I found a way out, or someone came to help me. Then he brought this towel up to my nose, and it was fuming in some chemical, and I was thrashing and trying to scream. Somebody heard, I guess, and shouted. I don't remember much. Time was all fuzzy, like I was falling on a roller coaster. When I did get my thoughts back together, it was getting dark and I was alone. I spent a long time getting out with ripping my clothes and scraping the stuff on my body where it was on skin. I still don't know what it was, but Googling it suggested bird lime or construction adhesive. It was also apparently a type of fetish, I found out. So, yeah. I walked back to my car, and there was no one there at night, and I just drove back to my cabin and sat in the bath, not even turning the water on. I just sat there thinking of what had happened, trying to get as much of that stuff off of me before I washed myself. My feet and other parts around my belly were stained black for a couple of weeks. And that night, I just lay there silent. Even now, just touching stuff like soap brings back that time, and I can't help but feel weird by simply feeling it. I'm wondering if anyone out there has had similar experiences or encounters with black adhesive. This happened a few years ago on a semi-official hiking trail, and I really don't remember much of what happened during or after the assault, possibly because of whatever fumes I had been exposed to. I remember driving very slowly because I was still feeling off balance, and in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have been driving, but there was no traffic that late. Thankfully, I made it out alive. Short but freaky, submitted by Barbara V. Something freaky just happened to me. I took a shower this morning while my boyfriend was asleep, and afterwards when I went into his bedroom to grab my shoes, when I opened the door, I saw this shadow behind it. It's kind of a glass door, but was painted over by the landlord, but you can still see silhouettes through it. And this wasn't one of my boyfriend's dogs or my dog. I opened the door, not thinking anything of it, and that's when I saw two eyes looking right at me, at my level, and then it quickly went behind the door and disappeared. It freaked me out, and I didn't have time to react because everything happened so quick. At first I thought it was my boyfriend playing a prank on me because he does that sometimes. It turns out it wasn't him. I still don't have an explanation for it. and I'm not sure what it was, but it really freaked me out. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you'd be so kind, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Give me a like, yeah, they do mean something, folks. And also, if you can, leave a comment below. Whether it's about the stories or anything else that's on your mind, I'd love to hear from you, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you're not following me on social media, you can find links to that in the description below. And of course, you can take your support of this channel a step further. Find my Patreon page, there's a link to that down there too, and also a link to my storefront at tpublic.com. You want to look like a fucking hotshot? Go get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.